Trine Moller, who has a much longer name than that, but who contacted me to say she was coming to CHI and she'd like to visit Ottawa. And I was like, yes! So I'm very excited to introduce you, and you can explain what you're doing with your PhD, which is, I think, part of your talk.
It is.
And we're here until 11:30. If anybody wants to stay afterwards, you're more than welcome to. So
Definitely.
With that, and thank you so much to Insert funding, Insert Create Grant, to enable us to have these wonderful international and local and national visitors. So here we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that opportunity, Liz. Thank you so much. Okay, black screen. That happened for me 2 seconds before my CHI presentation yesterday. Imagine how much adrenaline comes to your body when that happens. Anyways, I've included my CHI presentation in this whole sort of presentation because I was very new to CHI, and when I arrived on Sunday, I thought you could just walk in the workshop. Please come in and be quick. There's chairs over here, and one there, and one more there. Cool. Yeah, so I didn't know that you had to sign up for the workshops. I didn't know that you had to be invite only to some of the other things that were happening at CHI. So you're a first-timer sometimes, and I'm definitely a first-timer CHI. And when I then had to do my presentation yesterday, my computer rebooted just before I had to do the presentation. So I'm slightly learning what that is all about. Anyways, I'm doing a 3-year PhD project at Design School Kolding. I'll show you on a map where that is in a while. My PhD project is entitled, at the moment, it might change, it's entitled Intimacy, Accessory Design and Wearable Health Technology. So, Design School Kolding is in Europe and in Denmark. And this is Norway, this is England, this is Germany. It's a really old map. I find it very fascinating. But in Kolding, we have one of Denmark's 2 design universities. Design School Kolding has a long tradition within craft, and we do practice-based design research. So this is my background. I'm a practitioner within fashion and textiles design within an industrial design department at another faculty in Denmark. Then I have an MA in Design, Health and Wellbeing from Kingston University in London. That's the reason why I have a little dialect of English. And then I have a second master's degree in Design Management. So actually in my PhD project, I combine these sort of things. And Kolding was just announced UNESCO Design City in a league with Helsinki, Tel Aviv. So we put a big emphasis, of course, also due to the design school's placement in Kolding, but in the whole municipality. We have a design office in the municipality where the municipality's vision is that we design life for the citizens. And that's a very ambitious vision, if you ask me, because what is the need of the citizens? Okay. My PhD project starts in the area of wearable health technology. Current wearable health technology is sort of clumsy, it's medical, it's clinical, and it normally has a work culture around engineers, occupational therapists, nurses, carers, etc. It's often designed within a biomedical model, and it clashes with what I'm very much interested in, which is wearability, because it's designed for bodies. So it's something to do with wear, something to do with fit and personal style. Why is that? Well, that's because we are humans. We're very social. As long as there have been humans, we've had a natural sort of need for adorning ourselves. Back in those times, we used fur, we used natural materials to sort of put ourselves in a sort of hierarchy of position and hierarchy. So in my PhD project and at Design School Kolding, I teach accessory design. But what is accessory design? We have daily conversations about that in Kolding. Because the head of accessory design there, Josephine Winters, has a background within jewellery. And I have a background in fashion and clothing technology. And what is there in between? Well, shoes. That's a complete certain practice in itself, but it's both functional and expressive. Jewellery, we could argue that that's only expressive. But actually, if you look at your own jewelleries and start to investigate the stories that are embedded in your sort of favorite jewelleries, then it's not only expressive qualities that you're carrying on your body. Then we have bags, and what we are particularly interested in is the relationship between the body and the materials that we wear on it. So that's what I mean when I say accessory design. So in my 3-year PhD project, I'm looking at wearable health technology companies to see how accessory design practices fit within that construction, with an aim of meeting the needs, personal needs, of citizens with a diverse or specific need. That could be elderly, that could be people with disabilities, it could be a lot of ranged needs that I'm trying to cover. So in my journey, and in the beginning, I was sort of aiming for what I sort of put in as accessory thinking towards this field. So within this 3-year journey, I'm building up my knowledge generation of design experiments. And I work with different kind of companies. I did some case studies. I've been in an exchange stay. And I did a pilot study in the early beginning of my project. And some of them I'll present to you today. One of them were turned into a conference paper, which I unfortunately couldn't go to Hong Kong and present because I was very much pregnant at that time. But here you see 3 nice ladies. And I was interested in, okay, I had to be, very specific. I had to aim for sort of a focus group. So I picked women 65 plus of age. I went down to the local sort of community house where they met up twice a week to hear, talks, do sort of game plays, have, lovely chats when you are in that age of your life where you do not work anymore. Where do you go? And I asked if anyone wanted to participate in a research study about, future helping aids. I was not talking about wearable health technology. I was not talking about accessory design. But this was a part of a teaching project that I had together with the accessory design students. And I wanted the students to go out of the design school in Kolding to start interact with women 65 plus, to learn about their favorite accessory, to understand what qualities are relevant. Because when we look at wearable assistive technologies, research shows that between 50 to 56% are abandoned. People do not want to wear these products. And why do you think that is so? Well, they are stigmatizing. As I said before, they're clinical, they're medical. And if you have to wear them at home or in your social settings, how does that make you look? So I was interested in the objects that these women prefer to wear. So I was asking them about their favorite jewellery, about their favorite functional accessory, and about their favorite clothing accessory. And I sent out the students to do these interviews. And they documented it, they had consent forms, and they came back with a lot of rich material. The findings from that study is that sort of an ethnographic approach, go out in the field, dig up new knowledge, are applicable in accessory design practice. The students could really use this rich material that they gathered from these women within their future design processes. I also found out that accessories are objects of unique qualities beyond functional and material existence. And this is very interesting knowledge when you have to design future objects for the body. Accessories are relational objects because they are part of our identity. So it's not just a pair of shoes, it's not just a pair of glasses. They are specifically selected by some reason. So, as part of the 3-year PhD project, you have to go on an exchange. So I went to Nottingham Trent University where I met Sarah Ketley. She was involved in the project An Internet of Soft Things, where they worked with mental health organization to start a conversation on behalf of the mental health persons. So they created these workshops. And in my stay and talking to Sarah about this idea that I had, our conversation slightly changes into an approach, a way of designing. So during that exchange, I saw also how in the Internet of Soft Things project, they used simple accessories to embed technology in to start having these conversations about daily challenges, hard times, going out in public if you have a mental disease, stuff like that. How do you carry that with your family and friends? Here's a brooch. So the design was not really, important here. What was important was the conversation about, okay, would it be nice if it had a light? Would it signalize to your family and friends, okay, now I need to, go somewhere else, be myself, have a little of quietness, or whatever that was. But this was accessories. So I learned a lot from that and started to see, okay, this accessory approach, a way of designing, is actually applicable in wearable health design. Both to have a conversation and start something else, important knowledge, but also to maybe learn, for example, mental health carers, what these issues were all about. So the project actually developed this really nice toolkit where you could learn to, without having a technology education or background, you could learn how to embed technology within these products. And I don't know if you sort of figured that out yet, but I'm not a technology person. So that's the reason why I talk the way that I do about it. What came out of this collaboration was a model that Sarah and I started to talk about, because Make a Vera Viewer was the title of an exhibition about jewellery in Scotland. And the guy who came up with it is a jeweler and a researcher and did a PhD in 2005. But he never really thought about the term. And I saw the term, ooh, this is interesting, because here's a relationship. There's a relationship between the maker, the designer behind the design for the wearer, but there's always someone viewing. And I would say that current wearable health technology only goes this way. It doesn't go and include this perspective. So we wrote about this in online available article in the International Journal of Design. And Louise just told me today that she was a little involved in that role as well, which was it's really fun. It's a small world. But you can go there and find it, and you can actually also read it if you have the energy for that. Okay. In Denmark, you can do a PhD as a monography, which is around 100 pages of your research, where you write down what you learned and what you generated and stuff. Or you can do an article-based PhD research thesis. I chose the article-based, and that's the reason why I went to Kai to present my paper yesterday. Because even though my computer rebooted, there was another guy who took my slot, and I had the 4th slot in my session. So that was really nice. But the paper that Stav published is called Presenting the Accessory Approach, a startup's journey towards designing an engaging fall detection device. And that's one of my design experiments in the ladder that I showed you, where I had the opportunity to work with a startup company who came to design school Kolding to show a wearable fall detection alarm for care home residents. What do you see when you see that image of their first prototype? Sorry? A US, yes. Any else? Ideas come to mind?
I don't know what this is, but it looks like a cloth.
Exactly. That was also what I saw. And it really intrigued me to, ooh, this is an interesting case. Because it was a startup with young engineers who wanted to owe a lot of money and create these nice devices for care home residents. Well, maybe it shouldn't look like a coffin then. And maybe it shouldn't be in sort of a nylon necklace. Because the premise was that the care home residents had to wear this all time at the care home. So I asked the company, that's interesting, that's your first prototype, what will the next prototype look like? Have you been thinking about that? And said, oh, this is really great, we just hired 2 jewelry design interns. And I saw a really interesting opportunity to meet up with them to present my accessory approach. Because what I'm also interested in is the cultural fit and that mismatch between the wearable fall detection alarm and the care home resident's sort of daily appearance to be, a person in a care home. So all these combined, the accessory approach facilitates something else. And to contextualize that, I'm very much inspired by 2 professors who, and as you know, Sarah Ketley, I visited during my exchange day, who both handed in their PhD in 2007. Jane Wallace was putting to notion in her PhD research that there is a very large difference between use and wear. And if you use a product, it's sort of an interaction between you and the product. But if you wear a product, there's somehow a body-centric, relationship between you and the body. Sarah Ketley, she actually raised in her PhD thesis sort of a critical approach towards sort of the cultural and the aesthetic means of artifacts that we wear on the body. So I'm very much inspired by these 2, and they both did their PhD in human-computer interaction research. So it's something to do with experience. And here I'm very much inspired by Julian Orr. I don't know if you know him, but he wrote a really, really nice and not that thick book, so it's easy to read, about how he looked at other designers. They were designing copy machines for Xerox, but he looked at their practices. So he wrote sort of an ethnographic way of understanding their experience in their design practices of these copy machines. Look him up. He's very interesting and very easy to read. McCarthy and Wright were some of the design researchers who within interaction design actually put novelty within this field for learning other designers about designing for experience. And when it comes to wearable health technology, to meet cultural fit of the wearer, one person you should definitely look at is Peter Busch. She's now finishing up her PhD thesis, but in 2015 she wrote a really nice paper about crafting wearable well-being. And she is, so to speak, a wearer of wearable health technology herself, so she's very experienced and a very interesting person. Graham Pullum, he put a book together in 2009 about design meets disability. In the book, he explains about the style transformation of glasses. Glasses is an accessory. Glasses were seen as very stigmatized back in the days. Well, you couldn't be a highly respectable man if you wore a pair of glasses, because then you were disabled. And nowadays, you can buy glasses in the airport, you can buy them at the pharmacist, you can buy them everywhere, and you can pick your own material, own choice, color, etc. at a different price. And as I mentioned to you before, I wrote the journal article together with Sarah Ketley in 2017, where we proposed the accessory as a platform, as a starting point, instead of starting with the technology. And then looking into human-computer interaction and research through design. How do we generate research, new knowledge through design? I'm doing this in my PhD, research through design experiments. But Zimmerman, Felicia, and Evanson wrote an article about how research through design within the field of human-computer interaction sort of could ground, inform, and inspire other designers to do product development. So this is sort of the theory and the contextualizing of my research, at least for this paper, to say, okay, this is what puts together the idea of the accessory approach. In the study of meeting the founder of the startup company, I asked him, could I meet up with your jewelry design interns to present my accessory approach? And he said, well, that's really interesting. So they came to Design School Kolding for an afternoon. It was 2.5 hours. And I presented to them a methodology which we very much use at the Design School Kolding, because we also have an interest in fashion and sustainable fashion, not at least. The wardrobe study is an ethnographic way of understanding people's relationship to their clothes. And I thought, well, this is also very relevant within the field of accessory design. It's just smaller parts. And Ingun Klepp and Mai Bjerk put this methodology together to understand use. Why do we keep something longer in our wardrobes instead of other items? And what our emotional relationship to our clothing. I wanted to try that method out with these design interns. So I met with them for 2.5 hours in Kolding. That was the only time I met with them. I presented to them the wardrobe study, and I asked, would you share with me the empirical material you'll find within your internship at the company? So we wrote a consent form, and they said yes. And what they discovered in this wardrobe method was a broader sense of the persons that they were designing for. Because they went out and asked them about their favorite accessories. Jewellery, some clothing, some functional accessories, but they also got a much richer invitation into these people's lives. So, analyzing that, I sort of share the accessory approach into two. It's something to do with methodology. So it offers a dynamic method of collecting significant empirical material. One of the interns said it provokes emotional attachments between the user and his or her favorite accessories. The other one responded and said, the care home residents actively interacts in the exchange of personal preferences by inviting the designer to take a glance in wardrobes, cupboards and shrines, etc. On the other hand, the accessory approach fosters an empathic skill set. They almost became friends, these design jewellery interns and the care home residents. And one of them said, it is an approach that establishes a sharing platform of intimate memories, relations, and rewarding stories. So having all that material, all their images, they wrote in diaries about their reflections during the internship, and also they were sending me their last report on the internship. I had a lot of material. And this is sort of a qualitative inquiry to go through very rich material, but how to handle that? Well, I lean towards a professor in psychology called Svend Brinkmann from Aalborg University in Denmark. And he has framed this term stumbling upon data. And I do not use the word data. I use the word empirical material. And he says that qualitative inquiry is all about the objective. So stumbling upon experiences, for example, can give you the opportunity to learn something new. So I took this very sort of grammatically and said, okay, whatever I stumble upon in the empirical material and the images, I'll use for something. I'll put a note, I wrote it down, and one of my stumbling experiences throughout going through all the material was this particular image. And what you see here is the existing fall detection alarm on a care home resident's arm. And then you see a nice, delicate bracelet in gold. And I see a very big difference there in the aesthetics. I see a very big difference in materials. And I see a very big difference in the attached stories and emotion in each object. And I think it's a very striking and astonishing picture because it really shows the difference of what we're dealing with here. I photocopied all their diary material. I started color coding it to sort of categorize what I was looking for. And I definitely saw some astonishing points going through the material in regards of empathy. For example, one of the interns, and she was from Bulgaria, so she might be educated in another sort of culture. She actually wrote about the care home residents as subjects. Well, that has nothing to do with flesh and bone and body and, social, psychological or physical body. Something to do with an object. So there was a big lack of empathy there. Then I categorized technology work because they wrote a lot about what they were involved in with technology within the startup company. And then I categorized accessory points. They were trained in jewelry design. They had a discipline. And how did they embed that throughout the process? Of course, inspired from what I told them about the accessory approach. But how did they went out and practiced it? Author reflections was just a note for myself to see, okay, where were these points of astonishment throughout the process? So I rolled it out in a timeline to understand key activities throughout the intern's design process. And 2.5 weeks within this process, I had the opportunity to present to them the accessory approach. They went back to the startup company, and almost 2 months later, they went out to do the wardrobe study as an ethnographic exploration at 2 care homes. What happens with the astonishing point of empathy? Well, there wasn't much. But when they went out and met them in their own home, talking about their favorite accessories, many more astonishing points about empathy were put in their diaries. If you look at technology work, they worked a lot about 3D printing, prototyping. In the whole 6 months, they were working on 2 prototypes. So the second prototype had to be developed here, and the last prototype was developed here. But after that exploration, they focused on something else. They started to focus on their own role as jewelry design interns within the startup and how they actually embedded this sort of accessory approach after meeting and understanding these care home residents' favorite objects to wear on the body. So the design process of the little company started with the first prototype, then went into some sketches, the second prototype where they had to fit the technology, well, or at least they had to fit the design after the technology, which is a very, common case. But then they went out and were completely inspired by Jewellery, who was actually bold and chunky enough to carry the technology. And then something astonishing also occurred, because they found out that they had to share all this empirical material with the rest of the startup company. And that was engineers, it was marketing and sales people, no with arts and craft background, no who sort of had an aesthetic language about what were this care home residents all about. And that led to the third prototype, which we call Pearl. And it's a magnetic brooch, or brooch, I can never say that word right. How do you say it? Brooch, okay. Who can be attached between layers of clothing and can maybe be a familiar object for the care home residents to wear at all times. You can activate it by a push button. It has antenna and speaker function. It has a other technological function who tells the care personnel if you are laying down or standing up. And it has a GPS enrolled. So it met all the technological specifics of the care home. But it also gave the care home residents the choice of picking or choosing between 16 different variations of cover and material. But it's still only there in plastic. But it's a process, you might know. So, does this embed an engagement within the Vera or the jewellery design interns? Well, at least it facilitated a different view on the care home residents to be persons wearing the fall detection alarm Pearl instead of using it as a fall detection alarm. So it became a jewellery. So the findings is that the accessory approach facilitates a specific focus when doing user research. It is a way of implementing a sustainable approach towards wearables design. And why is that so? Well, that's because it puts a new emphasis on materials. Think of the materials that are used for accessory design. Think of the materials that are used for wearable health technology. Could we foster an even longer lifespan of wearables if we used more natural, authentic, and precious materials? That's a very good question. But then it fosters multifaceted roles of the designers. They both handle the 3D printer, but they also went out and did ethnographic fieldwork. Then it created a user engagement in the whole design process. So the care home residents were actually really interested in testing these devices when the designers came back and asked further questions. So they became co-designers of the fall detection alarm. And that questions a technology-driven approach towards wearable health technology. And lastly, it demonstrates that adorning factors are relevant in a design process of wearables. So the conclusion for this paper were that the accessory approach is a design approach that uses ethnographic method and practice accessory skills and materials in order to create wearable health technology that a person can identify with due to personal choice and thereby foster an engaging relationship. So that was what I learned from that design experiment. I might have one or two more examples of my design experiments. And this is another one. This is actually before my PhD studies, where this industrial design guy came to me because I was very much interested in textiles and wearable health technology, and he said, well, I designed one. It's an ostomy bag. Is there anyone who don't know what an ostomy is? Good. But when you are one of the largest companies who design and develops a one-time use wearable health technology, what are then the paradox of personalizing wearable health design? And can you even ask an ostomy wearer, do you see your ostomy bag as a fashion accessory? Well, I did that because I put together a questionnaire and I sent it to a focus group at Facebook, and a lot of people answered, and I thought, yes, this is really good, rich, empirical material. But the questions I asked, okay, do you feel that the bag is designed for your personal preferences? And they were like, what are you talking about? It's just an ostomy bag. I can't get away of my shit if I don't use an ostomy bag. So, personal preferences, come on. And I was just, oh, geez. Okay, fine. So, but there are some paradoxes, and that's interesting when it's one of the larger production companies within this field. And you can see here the style transformation of the ostomy bags. They started in 1957 with this woman who had a sister who got an ostomy operated. It's a little hole in the stomach where you get rid of your waste. And she thought, okay, I can create a better solution. So she designed the first sort of ostomy bag in 1957. Then it evolved. And as you see here, there is a slightly change in the design and materials. This is the industrial designer behind. His name is Jacob Bendix. And he did a lot of color testing to find the right color for the redesign of the ostomy bag to not be so visible under a white shirt. Because this area is of course filled with taboo, it's filled with stigma and discreetness. And if you have a white shirt on top of a skin-colored ostomy bag, then you can actually see that there's something there. And this is the former ostomy bag, and you can see it has a little see-through quality, which I don't think is that nice when it's in this area. It's made of a non-woven material, so it's textile fibers that are glued together, whereas the redesign is polyester. That's the fabric we have in linings and in pockets. So it's a cheap material, and it's still the same price to produce when they produce that many, but it has a complete other tightness in the weaving structure than the former one. And actually, he, by using fashion design methods, created this particular gray to pattern it. So they patterned that particular gray because that was the best gray that you couldn't see under a white shirt. So that's what he's doing there. He's testing the see-throughness of the different colors. And he was very much intrigued by the wearer's sense of self. And that's what fashion design is all about. So another interesting element were the company's marketing material. This is a lifestyle setting. This is the bathroom with highly Danish design. It has a little bookshelf, it has a hanger, it's a nicely guy who gets dressed in the morning. It doesn't really say medical, clinical. This could be an everyday setting. So this is another way to change the perspective of this area, which is why the company is a quite interesting case for me in my PhD project. This is the last project that I think I'll present to you. And right now it's an abstract for the Design for Health conference. And I've written it together with Peter Busch, who I met in, during my exchange day, and then invited to Kolding to teach during one of my design experiments. And it's a quite long title, and Peter is English, so that's the reason. They really know how to put words in titles. But what you see here is one of the students' design. And I'll explain about that later. Actually, she had an industrial design background, this girl. This is really interesting. In a week, she created that jewellery. So, cool. Okay, Peter has developed this BioPsychosocial Framework for wearables. She has put this in a journal article for the Design for Health journal. And that's an interesting new journal, which I think you might find relevant because it covers a lot of areas within the field of design for health. Peter has a background as a jeweler. She's now doing PhD research about wearability. And she has covered 8 layers of wearability. So fit, function, aesthetics, style, materials, making, meaning, and emotional engagement. And she clarified this by working with different types of persons who were wearing wearable health technology. So she created these workshops and gathered all these sort of qualities to make this framework. And in the design experiment that I'll present to you, use this model as an analysis. So I took I took Peter's model and said, okay, how did we sort of fulfill these 8 layers of wearability to create wearables that both met fit, function, materials, making, style, aesthetics, emotional engagement, and meaning for the wearer. And during the 5 weeks of the project, the design experiment, this is one of the students. We had a guest lecturer, and that was Sarah Ketley, who introduced this method of describing a person by putting 10 objects on a string. So the company that we worked with was a Danish prosthetic and corset and how do you say that? They developed these wearable prosthetics and different other objects for the body of their wearers who had different sort of diseases and disabilities. And we were able to work with 4 of them. So each student in this task portrayed the ones that they were working with by 10 objects on a string. And what happened was that by portraying, and of course this was a pair of legs of a prosthetic user, this was sort of relationship between the person and the person's family. All these small symbols sort of reflected that refinement making processes of these accessory designers. So what we learned from that was that here we see different skills that were used to work together with these wearers, but also could we take this string of information back to the wearers that we were working with and then have an exchange about, so why do you think I'm one big happy ball, which were her transformation of the guy she worked with, and his passion within heavy metal music, and his tattoo behind his knee, where he had these electrical sort of impulses from a machine so that he can control his stiff leg. And in that exchange, something really beautiful happens. And this student actually got on a really, really deep emotional level with this guy. And this is why it's a very, very rich method. I'll come back to that slide because, and I'll explain to you why it was a rich experience. Because this is another student. And she worked with a woman with a prosthetic leg who was also an orthopedist. Is that the right word? Orthopedist? Good. So she was both the user herself, but also sort of a clinician who treated other prosthetic users or wearers. And the student, after she developed the line of objects, then the next brief was to take one of these objects and make that as an inspiration to create a jewellery. So the student, she said, okay, fine, I'll do a brooch. Yeah. And I'll symbolize her sort of prosthetic leg in that little thing going on here, where it sort of could swing a little bit. And here, this was sort of her family relation. She had a son that was very tight. So she created this brooch for the woman. And she asked her, could you wear this for 2 weeks? And please explain to me what your feelings was of wearing this. And she was a very pragmatic woman. But she played along. She got a little diary and wrote down her experiences while wearing this object. It has nothing to do with a process, but the whole exchange made her realize as a clinician that if she could give the same gift to her clients, then something magical could happen. For example, she had this big guy coming in. He had former been together with a criminal sort of rocker gang. So he had lots of tattoos, and he had cancer in his leg, so he got it amputated. So he had to now live a complete other lifestyle. And she treated him with this sort of awkwardness when he comes in, a very tough guy, don't want to talk about maybe emotions, sitting in front of her, having to realize, okay, would you like this metal sort of prosthetic leg, or would you like this sort of more real foot-like prosthetic? And he was like, he was still very much in shock. So she actually offered him a prosthetic leg with tattoos, because she had herself been through this sort of way with the student, where they talked about her personal preferences, her documented as 10 things on a string to be put in a little gift. So that sort of changed the mindset within the company. And this was back to the French girl who were portrayed in the first image. She designed a necklace. It's a piece of metal that you put in a thread, and then you have a little sort of an aid that you could put back on the metal plate. And that was sort of a new technology that she developed within this device. So this is sort of a nerve stimulator device, which Peter Bush has. And she said, could you please just look at it? It's called First Choice. It's blue. You can attach it to your linen. But when you attach it to the linen, you can't control what it's actually has to do, which is be connected to these patches that you then stick on your body to sort of have this nerve stimulation thing going on. So the industrial designer from TU in Eindhoven, who was on an exchange, she said, okay, could this patch be a little more natural? So she used flower leaves and coated them to say, okay, this new technology with Bluetooth or Wi-Fi to be, recharge at a piece of metal that can recharge itself by motion, well, that could actually happen in the nearest future. So why do we have this gadget, this plastic device, when we can have a more natural, common look. So that's a very good example of how she embedded the accessory approach. Okay, so this is one of my last slides. I don't know how we are on time, but I think I've talked quite a lot. It's just to say that in Kolding, and please let me know if you come, we have an old castle, and this year it's its 750 years anniversary, and we always have the graduate from the design school exhibited there. They have the largest collection of Danish contemporary jewellery in their archives, and it has never been shown. So Georg Jensen, does anyone knows him? Well, then you might have to look into what he's been doing. He's an old silversmith, does a lot of tableware, now clothing and everything. Not clothing, but tableware and cloth. That was the word that I had to say. And a lot of silversmithing and watches, jewellery. So there's a strong tradition in Denmark within jewellery making. And at the castle, they every year have this contest where gold and silversmiths come to contest to create the jewellery of the year. So there is a strong tradition in the heart of Kolding at this castle. And what we're working on in a future perspective is to understand how we can approach the field of Danish contemporary jewellery to enable a particular framing for wearable health design that emphasize cultural fit. So that is what I'll be working on, hopefully, when I'm almost done with my PhD in a little less than a year. And my thesis will be about my publications. And right now I have 3, so I need 2 more to go, which is interesting if I'll reach that aim, but let's see. I'm working on it. So, yeah, thank you. And please ask questions.
I'm curious about when you think is the best time to do ethnography in a project. So for example, with the wearable fall detector,
Yeah.
it's more for the physical design of it.
Yeah.
Ideally, when would you do it even when the tech is being developed, or what are your thoughts on that?
If this was my startup company, I've done this here. Even before there was a company, I would say. As I told you, I have a master's degree in design, health and well-being, and what I learned is you always start with the user. You always start with the need. And if you don't know that, then why develop new technology? This world is full of crap and technology and clothing. So we need to think differently. We need to be more specific on what is the actual need, what is the real need. And we don't know that because we didn't do ethnography research. So always in front of everything, I would say.
You made a really interesting distinction when you were talking about at that stage in your talk, and you said, I don't say data, I say ethnographic materials.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little more about what you see as the difference between the two and why you make that distinction.
I think, first of all, it's a personal thing as well. And why is it personal? It's because I'm doing qualitative, research. I do not do quantitative, so why should I use the word data? For me, it's numbers, but of course, ethnographic research material could also be numbers. I only work with 2 interns here. Does that qualify my study? I would say yes. Someone would say no. So it's an interesting discussion, and I think you can choose whatever you like as long as you can argument for why am I using this term rather than data. And I'm a visual person. I use my senses a lot. And if you wrote to me, Trine, can we meet tomorrow at 15 o'clock? I would say, okay, we'll have to meet tomorrow at 5 because it's a 5. And that's a brain thing with me and numbers, so I think it's very personal, to be honest. And then, of course, I'm inspired or influenced by some of the, for example, my second supervisor, he doesn't even say data, even though he is within participatory design within sort of a more science faculty. He say openings. Depends on how you see it, I would say.
Can I jump in
Yeah.
on this?
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting in terms of the language question in and of itself. Wittgenstein is someone who
Yeah.
you want to tackle.
Look into.
Tackle. Because he introduced the concept of communalism in
Mm.
language.
Mm.
And when if you have this model of what you think data is in your mind, what do you think that would look like,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And it may not resonate with like yourself,
Mhm, mhm,
right? It
mhm.
doesn't resonate
Mhm.
with those textures,
Mhm.
those qualities
Mhm.
that you're presenting.
Mhm.
And so that notion of meaning is used rather than the subjective terminology that we
Mhm.
like, is an interesting, and I think it hits the point.
Yeah.
of
And
what we're
and
discussing.
and just to say, I've spent a lot of time during design experiments. I haven't been that good at reflecting within theory, so I lean towards design, research, theory. So that is what I'll do in my last phase here. I'm right now. I'm sort of, I don't use this anymore. I'm here. I have to thin this up. I have to dig deeper into theory, and that's the hard point for me, at least. Yeah. But I have 10 months.
There are times when we actually start with materials.
Yes.
I'm playing the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Because I'm much more about starting.
Yeah.
But when we start with materials,
Mhm.
because maybe there's a new material,
Mhm.
and you know what I'm thinking of here,
Mhm,
but so then we have to, once we start to frame it
Mhm.
with the users, we're already putting a bias on it as to how we think it could be used
Mhm.
to get their response.
Mhm.
And so I don't think I've really figured out how to avoid that bias. I don't know if you've ever faced that problem. Can I talk about it? Because there's actually two of you here. So Josie found this material that goes from opaque to transparent. Transparent to opaque.
Yeah.
And so now Danny's trying to understand, could we use that in
Yeah.
clothing?
Yeah.
And there has been a whole project which you might know about, the intimacy dress, which we've been having trouble finding out about.
Okay.
Several dresses that actually use it, and we were really surprised to see it, because you think when you're wearing something that it would be very fluid,
Mhm.
and in fact, it's not.
Mhm.
And so that also presents a problem.
Mhm.
So it's not clear how to engage the users without already putting it in clothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Showing them this clothing,
Yeah.
which is very high-end
Yeah.
and glamorous.
Yes. I come to think of Elizabeth Sanders' landscape of design.
2 weeks.
Be here. She has the most incredible web page with all her material. You can just. She's an incredible woman. Anyways, she has this landscape of design where she puts a notion this design-driven or product-driven approaches, and I think that is at least something to do with what you're talking about, Louis. But of course, we have to develop really, really interesting materials. And should we do that with the notion of the user need in our back head, or should we just go out and be really interesting material scientists? That's a very good, debate. And I think that you should always do what you like the most. And of course, I like to interact with people. So this is why I interact with students, and this is why I I love to come in a foreign house to see how people live, you know. So that is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And of course, I like to experiment with materials as well, but not as much as the other parts. So, yeah.
So one thing, I worked in healthcare
Yeah.
for a long time.
Yes.
And it's, I had some parallels
Yeah.
with space design to what you're doing.
Yes.
And I'd like to talk about the material question.
Mm-hmm.
What we always used to do, traditional approach in design, is you put designing the environment and you put together materials and you put together the drawings and blah, 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 and you present it to the users.
Mhm.
This is the traditional approach. One experiment we did is we said, well, we're not going to make these decisions.
Yeah.
And we brought a box
Yeah.
of a ton of stuff,
Mhm.
materials. And we had maybe 30 clinicians there. And we took an entire, and we put everything in
Mhm.
loosely, no order.
Mhm.
And we just had people circulate and they picked things up,
Mhm.
they talked,
Mhm.
and we documented what they were saying.
Yeah.
And then when we came back the next time, we tried to reflect
Mhm.
that in the concepts that we
Mhm.
were. So it was letting them explore and identify,
Mhm.
I guess.
Mhm.
Use that word
Mhm.
in terms of identity. And that seemed to work a lot better.
Mm.
Rather than selecting.
Yeah.
Or in the process of selecting.
Yeah.
It was random.
Yeah.
And maybe that's similar to what you're saying.
Definitely. I mean, one of my projects were also about the first design experiment was together with occupational therapists and pedagogues, because they were working at an institution where they wanted autistic adults to wear a digital screen where they could see these, you know, very graphic objects of an everyday task. So, for example, a bath could be a bathtub, and that this is a very common way of you know, putting structure into an autistic adult's life, to have these small images maybe on a Velcro board where you can, you know, okay, this is where we are in the day and this will be your next task and this will be the task after that. So they thought of doing it digitally. And that was a really interesting brief to test out my approach, because should it be an Apple Watch or something, or what were the autistic adults' personal preferences actually like? So I presented to them the wardrobe study method. They went out with the autistic adults and looked into their favorite accessories, and that was all about, you know, touch, because they are very sensory people, the autistic adults. So they found materials and objects that were actually much more relevant for wearing on the body of these autistic adults, rather than an Apple Watch, for example, which would be the common choice. So in that perspective, the pedagogues became designers, and they came up with some quite nice prototypes of how to embed, for example, the feeling of skin in a wearable, because they like to touch skin, you know. So that understanding of, again, then materials, and then see it from the expert's view and not the design view, is a very interesting way of looking at it as well, I would say.